This is Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur with your host, Lynn Freest. Lynn will share ideas and expert advice from people that are walking in your shoes and living their encore careers, where they want and at the pace they want. You'll start a company of one with confidence and knowledge to live a fulfilled life of freedom and ease. Lynn is a coach and leadership consultant whose mission is to show senior leaders and experts how to start something refreshing and new after a full career in the corporate environment.
Welcome to this episode of the podcast, Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur. This is episode 128, and it's 2 great resources for an encore career. Making the leap from being a corporate leader and expert into becoming a solopreneur can be daunting, but the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and do the work you love. And I can be that guide and thinking partner for you. As your coach, I'll help you go farther and faster based on what I've learned from being on this journey for several years. If you even have some thoughts about starting an encore career, please contact me and take the quiz available on my website. So today I'm going to review 2 books that are great resources for those considering an encore career. The first is by Marc and it's titled Repurpose Your Career, a practical guide for the second half of life. And the second one is by John Tarnoff, and his book is titled Boomer Reinvention, How to Create Your Dream Career Over 50. And I actually reviewed Marc back on podcast 111, so you can also hear more about him on that show if you'd like to. Both these books and their authors have similar themes. They're talking about people that are looking for encore careers, and they each have a little bit different approach. So again, just as I have an approach for it, I wanted to share their approaches with you. So the first one is Repurpose Your Career with Marc Miller. Marc had a long career. In fact, he had several different careers. And he's been in some startups that he's founded himself, and he's also worked for nonprofits. So in general, he's had a variety of things, some of which he liked, several he didn't like. But he finally decided he was going to make a career that fitted for just what he wanted to do. And he experimented and has now actually said, okay, and here's how I would tell other people to do this. And sort of an interesting thing, and you'll hear about this if you listen to his interview on my podcast, he and his wife actually moved to live in Mexico, and they recently bought a home down there. They find the climate pleasant and a much lower cost of living. And again, he's actually emphasizing that in his podcast and in his blog about, what it might mean to live an expat life. Basically, Marc starts with the premise that this is not the time to retire in your second half of life. It's really time to reinvent yourself. He starts, just as I do, with the idea of mindset. We really have to prepare ourselves that work will now be different moving forward than maybe it was in the past in our corporate careers, but we'll have to face things like ageism, the things that maybe we faced and maybe we didn't, but they're now going to be real for us. Again, this idea, companies traditionally have felt that they wanted to work with people who had a long career runway in front of them. Well, that's interesting because actually millennials say they only prefer to stay in a job for 2 to 3 years. So, how long is that runway really in practice? But on the other hand, as boomers or as people who are experienced, we have to acknowledge that our skills can go stale. And it's going to be different for us. One of Marc's quotes was, we were literally raised through education life to be an employee. Now, all of a sudden, we have to consider the fact that we're going to be an individual or a solopreneur. And he also says, we have to look forward and we have to say, okay, now that we'll be in our 50s or 60s or even our 70s, how we work and what work we do is going to be different. Work is not going to work just like it was when we were in our 30s. And again, he also says, you have to think about, especially as you map this out over a couple of additional decades, how much do you want to work? You could be part-time. You could be a number of things. And one of the roles you could clearly play is that of a mentor. And you need to be mentored. So it's going to be both things. And I've mentioned this, in some of my work too, is that you will both mentor new talent, but you're also going to require people to mentor you, especially in terms of technology. The other thing that he mentions is, the importance of having a network. Now, often in the corporate world, our network was in a sense kind of built into what we did. But now we're going to have to be more intentional. The network is going to be different. You're going to need to connect with new and different people. And quite frankly, as you get older, some of your network has literally died off. But the idea is there are people out there that you need to intentionally go out and create a new network. And along with the network, you have to have a support system. So it's not just getting clients. It's also how can you find like-minded people? It may be your friends and family that you're trying to explain what you're trying to do here. My daughter-in-law has teased me and said I'm the busiest retiree she knows. But that whole idea of, does your family support you? Do they understand what you're doing? Can you find other people that are on a journey? They may be younger or older, any number of things, but are they on a similar journey to you? Then he says you got to start thinking about what's your new resume. And you need to be thinking about retracing your history. And not just in terms of job titles, but activities, events, things you did. Where were you really engaged and even excited about? Those could form the basis of what your new resume is going to look like. And to be honest, some of this is going to maybe translate into new fields. What you learned in your particular industry may actually apply to something else. So you have to, what are transferable skills that you've had? But as we move through this, we're going to have to say, we tend to make things up about why people do things. We just have to be open and let things show up and go as they are. But you do have to be able to create some distinction in your life. So, as you think about what's going to happen in the future of work, things that are just routine happen the same way every time, they're going to be automated. So you need to find out what are the things you did in your past career that weren't routine. How did you handle the exceptions? That's probably where your value and your distinction might come from. The things that will set you apart from others and that can show your value to a potential employer or somebody that, might hire you. Marc has kind of an interesting acronym on a couple other things, and he calls it SMAC, S-M-A-C. So you have to think about the arena of social. Who are the people you need to know? Where are they at? Where do you need to go find them? Where do you need to hang out? The next one is mobile. You have to accept the fact the world is mobile now. So if your picture of life is sitting in an office at a desk, you're going to have to probably think differently about that. You probably want to. You're also going to have to figure out what analytics, that's the A in the acronym. Again, you may not be the expert in analytics, but as a friend of mine once said, he had people who could handle the numbers. What he really needed was people who could ask the right questions. Well, you, with your experience, maybe that's a role you can help out with, but you'll still have to have some fundamental understanding of analytics. And then finally, the cloud. Again, it's whether you're thinking about your personal work, where you might work for people. You just have to get used to things are in the cloud. They're not on paper. They're not even on your desktop of your computer. Everything is in the cloud, so you have to get kind of comfortable with that. As kind of a quick aside, there's a movie out there called The Intern with Robert De Niro. And the movie is basically how he got tired of talking to his peers about their operations and what was going wrong with him. So he went to work for a young millennial, Anne Hathaway. And in the process, he helped her really develop as a CEO. It was an entertaining movie, but it's also instructive because, again, it might show you a picture of the role you could play in the second half of your life. Now, Marc in his book has a special section where he talks about working in your 70s. When you think ahead, okay, you will be different in your 70s. What you want to do will be different. But what do you want that to look like? Do you want to work 4 hours a day? Do you want to work 3 months out of the year? What kind of things do you think you might enjoy doing, as well as what you think you'll be able to do in your 70s? You're probably not going to have a physically rigorous job at that point, but you might. You never know. People are running marathons in their 70s. So it's one of those things, but you want to start thinking about your energy, your time, your health. How are you going to handle those things as you move forward from your 50s, 60s, and into your 70s or beyond that? Now, I return to another thing he's talked about, and that's the need to network. And again, his idea of networking is this isn't about selling. This is about learning. He says you're not out there to sell, but he talks about another acronym called AIR. So what your goal is when you go out and network is to ask for advice, ask people what they're doing, ask people for their insights, and then ask for recommendations. So again, it's not about trying to sell your services in many cases. And as you try to build your network, it's again, learning about other people, learning what they're thinking about, learning about what they're doing. And then another piece around networking is he said, remember the weak ties. And there's this whole idea around this idea of weak ties, but it's often, the people who knows you might know them. They're certainly not considered close friends, but this whole idea of who do you know and who knows you. And Marc says a suggestion on that is just go down and make a list of the people you've worked with over the last 20 years. And as you just list them out, are there any that you'd like to check in with again? And again, many of these people, they may still be employed. They may be in different businesses. They may be retired. But again, look for different people that you could go out and, network with. So that basically gives us a framework. And again, I recommend you read Repurpose Your Career and go back and listen to the podcast that I did with Marc. He's a fascinating person, and he has a fascinating story. Now, the next book is called Boomer Reinvention, How to Create Your Dream Career Over 50 by John Tarnoff. John is interesting. He comes from the entertainment arena. And one of the comments he makes in his introduction is he said he was fired for 39% of the jobs he had. Again, in the entertainment business, things ebb and flow. Projects start, they end. But anyway, at this point, John recognized that he was a boomer himself. So how do we figure out what we're going to do, especially as many of us are thinking about 20 to 30 years ahead of us? He has a 5-step methodology, and we'll kind of step through that to give you a flavor of it. But as with Marc and with me, he starts by working on mindset. One of the first things he says is, you're going to have to reconcile yourself with any issues that cloud your confidence or resolve. This idea, I'm not good enough or I'm too old. You're going to have to, really come to grips with that. You're going to have to be ready to redefine yourself. If I'm just a vice president of something or a director of something, you're going to have to spend some time thinking, well, what does that mean now? Again, as I've said, you got to think about what's your goal? Where do you want to work? When do you want to work? And what's the work that you love? Now, the next piece is, he says, as he talks about this practical plan he lays out, it's a series of a lot of small steps. You have to create your next act, your second career, your encore career, but it's done in small steps. It's not done all at once. So just as Marc said, John talks about you have to build a new network that can both help you connect with people that you can help and people that can help you to find jobs, things that you're going to look for. Now, I will say in John's book, a section of it is devoted to some marvelous set of profiles of people who had reinvented themselves. And this is in a variety of ways. Some of them went to nonprofits. Some of them started a business of their own. Some of them found a new career in a different field. So again, I'd recommend the book, and the profiles I think are very instructive and also help you, understand that this is all possible. So John then has 5 steps to his method. And then within those 5 steps, he has 23 reinvention strategies. All of those are available in the book and on his website. So the first step of the method is you have to reframe. The second is you need to sharpen your listening. Then you're going to have to accept some things are going to be different than they were in the corporate field. Then the fourth step is expressing. This is where you have to do some inner work and you really have to, get yourself going again. Having a vision, having a plan. And then the final step in the process is, again, connecting. So again, those 5 steps are, you need to learn to reframe your mindset, your life. You need to be listening to what's out there. What can you learn? What do people need? You have to accept where you've been, what you're doing, and the fact that, you're going to create something brand new. And then it's expressing. How do you go through and actually map out the plan that you're going to have, all these series of small steps that you're going to move forward with? And then, again, connecting. We keep coming back to this, and it remains important. So we always have to remember connecting. So I'll walk through some of the strategies that he has for each of those steps, just as John did. You want to go back and look at your resume, but not be limited by that. You need to go back and uncover things. What have you accomplished? What was it necessarily that you did? And then, how could you step beyond your resume? As you work forward, how are you going to reframe what you did, but also reframe yourself? How am I going to behave? What do I want to be like? What's the person I want to exhibit to others? Now, as he talks about listening, he suggests just do some basic research. Look into your field. Where's it been? Where's it going? What's changed in your field? What are the hot topics? Then after that, he says you need to really find some feedback. And for me, this kind of, as I would describe it, it's the customer discovery process. You need to go out and see the people who are active in your field. What is it that keeps them up at night? What are they thinking about? What are they dealing with? What is the technology out there? So it's those kinds of things. And the other thing is this whole idea of listening. You have to listen more deeply. And I'll call it inquiry listening. You really need to listen so you can hear the problem behind the problem. Often the first thing somebody will describe to you is kind of a surface level problem, even just an activity problem. But behind that is always some other deeper problems. So you have to really, hone your listening sense, which, if you were a corporate expert, may not have been where you spend a lot of time. And then in this whole listening thing is an interesting piece. And again, this gets back to what something Marc said too, is be of service. So even as you're deeply listening to people, should you have some insights or something like that, be generous and of service to people. People will remember that. And, it's one of those things that'll come back and pay dividends in the future. Because at the end, again, just as Marc was saying, you're not trying to sell anybody at this point. You're just trying to understand where they are and where your particular field as a whole is at. Then in that next bucket called accepting, this is where he sort of says you have to acknowledge what your career has been, what it hasn't been, where you've had successes, where you've had failures, but you can't be a victim. Something happened, you made a mistake, you got fired from a job, there's a gap in employment, whatever it may be. Just acknowledge that. You're trying to sell yourself as somebody who can help someone else moving forward. So accept the fact that something didn't go wrong. Don't try to cover it up. And quite frankly, you're going to be starting something new. So you're probably going to be making mistakes anyway. So own your expertise, but acknowledge that you're still learning. The other thing he mentions several times, and I'll mention it several times also, is as you think of accepting things like where you are in life, as far as how people see you, it's important. So you need to demonstrate your energy, your enthusiasm. You have to be able to overcome those stereotypes of ageism. So again, energy and enthusiasm. Now, as you go through this process, it seems to help to have some simple affirmations that you can say to yourself. Think about the things you've accomplished. Think about the things you've done right, or think about the steps you've taken. Those kinds of things. Again, you'll say, I didn't have any big accomplishments. Well, still, you had a lot of accomplishments over a career. Mother Teresa, who served poor people in India for many years, she never eradicated poverty. She did help people each day. You've done a lot of stuff in your life, and you've helped people each and every day. Be proud of that. Look how you can do that same helping for people going forward. Then in terms of the expressing arena, John talks about a Reinvention Journal. And I firmly believe in journaling, done it myself now for several years very consciously, but you're on a learning journey. And you need to see the progress you've made on that learning journey, as well as capture thoughts and go back and review them. So he recommends, and I would wholeheartedly agree with him, keep a journal. Talk out to the journal the things that you're thinking about, get it on paper. It's one of those things to have it bouncing around in your head, but it seems to help clarify yourself when you actually talk it out, write it out, whatever it may be. Then in terms of the expressing, John says, you need to conduct a good old-fashioned SWOT analysis. In other words, you need to look at your strengths, your weaknesses, what are the opportunities you see, and what are the threats you see. So this is you can just list them out, but it's one of those things that's good to take a step back and use these frameworks to kind of figure out where you're at, where you want to be going, and just how you see it right now. And it could change. And then after all this is kind of done in this expressing step, John talks about map out your vision. If you're in your 50s now, just as Marc Miller said, you need to think about what do you want your life to look like in your 60s, 70s, those kinds of things. So it's the whole idea of be intentional about what you want to do. You don't want to work like you did in your 30s. You want to do something else, and that'll be great. Then again, similar to Marc Miller's book, the fifth step of his process is connecting. Again, John talks a little differently about it. It says, turn your network into a career relationship funnel. And I think I can kind of get that because John comes from that entertainment background where there's a constant flow of people in and out of different projects. And this whole idea that we talked about earlier with weak ties, you're out there engaging with people. You're going to be trying to share valuable things with them. This may pay dividends in a way you don't understand or seem almost magical. Again, the connecting, we go back to something that John talked about earlier. How you present yourself is important. People have an impression of you, and you create that real quickly. You're going to be marketing yourself. You have to pay attention to those things like, what is your profile picture on LinkedIn? How does that LinkedIn bio read? Is it simply a stale resume like many of them were before? Or is this something dynamic that really says, this is the value I provide to you? It's always interesting to me that whether it be a website, an about page, or the LinkedIn profile, it's not really about me. It's really, what can I do to help others? That's what I'm really trying to express there, not just who I am and what jobs I've had. Then in this whole connecting, you probably want to start thinking of yourself as a thought leader. And to do that, you have to share stuff. You may be the smartest person on the planet on whatever subject you're an expert in, but if you're not sharing that with other people, nobody knows. So you have to become what's called a thought leader, you have to continually share, whether that's podcasts, whether that's blog posts, whether that's posting on LinkedIn, whether it's speaking at conferences. So these are things that you really need to do in this 5-step process that John shares. Again, both of these books I found amazing. They've informed me a lot. I really enjoyed them. And I've had a chance to talk with Marc and interview him, and I hope to at some point interview John also. And as you can see, I didn't invent all this stuff. I'm happy to share what other people's thinking on that. And in fact, I'll probably share some other books because I've found several people that have spoken on this subject, and they each have different perspectives. And in future episodes, I'll probably try to share some of that with you. So again, the two books are, and there'll be links in the resources, Repurpose Your Career, A Practical Guide for the Second Half of Life by Marc Miller with Susan Lahey, and then Boomer Reinvention, How to Create Your Dream Career Over 50 by John Tarnoff. So just to wrap up here on this episode, remember with an Encore career, the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and do the work you love. And as your coach, I can help you go farther and faster based on what I've learned and from being on this journey for several years. You now have the time, attention, and the money to make this leap, so let me help you. And if you have thoughts about starting an Encore career, please contact me. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.